in mind, and some of you have taken this class a couple of years ago, what I've had in mind is really putting together a series of 10, I don't know, it may not even end at 10 because there's a lot of subjects to cover from the Hebraic biblical understanding, but my hope and my desire is to help establish a better understanding of the things that we do, the things that we partake in, the things we believe, the things that we say. And I have the first couple of classes done. This one, answering the call, has to do with some of the initial covenants, the Abrahamic covenant, the Noah, the covenant that was signed with Noah, going back to Adam and Eve. So we will really touch on Bereshit a little bit today. I know that we didn't earlier, but we will today. And the next class is going to be about the peoples of the nations and how the Gentiles fit into this entire system that we know of today, and how that all took place in the days of Messiah. Truly, we are a unique people. Isn't that true? Amen. We really are a unique people. The children of Israel were called to be a unique people. And all of us, if you're a Gentile, you have been called to be grafted into this most unique expression, this most unique movement. And Messianic Judaism, or the Messianic Jewish movement, the Messianic movement, there are many names to it, is undoubtedly a very unique, a very different movement, a different way of expressing ourselves. And we really have a hard time fitting in to the norm. Much of evangelical Christianity doesn't really know what to do with us, what to do with our way of expressing. Even though, we hold some of the same beliefs, there are many areas that we're a little bit different in. Traditional Judaism struggles. They say, oh, you're not Jewish, you're nothing but Christians. And so somehow, in the mix of all this, we're striving to be a bridge between two worlds. And in the mix of that, we're trying to help identify the schism that took place, why we're here today, why we're doing the things we're doing, how in the world did this happen? Okay? And in order for us to be able to do that, we've got to go back into the Word to get a little bit of a foundation. We are in the process of becoming unique people. You guys believe that we're being shaped and molded in His image? And every day, and I've said this many times, especially over the last month, that revelation is the way in which the kingdom is advanced. We're constantly learning new things. Every day we should be reshaped. We should be renewed. We should be seeing things differently. We are in no way today in the same place that we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Maybe it wasn't even that long. The way that our understanding, the way in which we see the Word, oftentimes vastly different. When Avram in Genesis 12:1 was confronted by the only God in heaven and on earth, he was in Ur of the Kasdim, the most pagan of places. Adonai said, Lech lecha. He said, get yourself out. Get yourself out. And with those words should be resonating within our innermost being. All of us, to a certain extent, have a part of Abram, before he was Abraham. The Lord has called all of us to get ourselves out. Okay? With Abram specifically, it was with his land, and it was with his family. Okay? From the land and from the family. It may not be so severe, but to a certain extent, we have all been asked to get ourselves out of something. And we all know, I think, inside what those things are. He was essentially being instructed to separate himself and become unique, to become holy, kadosh, set apart. The same God who called Abram is the same God who calls us today. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. We're both physical and spiritual descendants of Abram together sitting here in this room. Our calling is no different than his. As believers in the God of Israel and in Yeshua, our Messiah, the revealed Messiah, it is crucial that we look deeply into the Scriptures. and establish the foundations which make up the core of our understanding and our practice. Again, to know why we do the things we do. One of my favorite verses is found in the book of Ecclesiastes, which was written in the latter part of King Solomon's reign. If you remember that he had an incredible amount of negative influence that he allowed himself to be privy to with all of his hundreds and hundreds of wives from various countries, idol-worshipping wives. It's believed that Proverbs was written in the earlier parts when he was untainted by the ways of the nations. And if you read the book of Ecclesiastes, there's a lot of lamenting on his behalf, okay, written in his latter part of his life. In the second to the last verse, he proclaims, "The conclusion, when all has been heard, fear God and keep his commandments," because this applies to every person. These words have resonated in the hearts and minds of all those who love the God of Israel from the time that they were written up until now. It's one of my favorite verses in the entire scriptures, because what you see is that King Solomon is coming back around towards the end of his days, and he's realizing the folly of his ways. If you remember, the entire book of Ecclesiastes is a lament of folly on his behalf. Second to the last verse, the conclusion, when all has been heard, fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. The same spirit of this verse can be heard in one of my favorite quotes of the traditions of the fathers, what's called the Pirkei Avot, literally the chapters of our fathers, by a 3rd century sage who had a very unique name, Yochanan ben Bagbag, or Bagbag, I guess you would say. And he wrote in Pirkei Avot 5:26, "Turn Torah and turn it over again, for everything is in it. Constantly contemplate it, grow old and gray over it, and do not swerve from it, for there is nothing more excellent than it." It's very difficult to find any fault in this statement. You read the book of Psalms, especially in the 119th chapter of Psalms, and you see these words echoed by King David hundreds of times, in hundreds of different ways, in more than 100 different verses. Very much in line with the final line of the Torah service. You remember the final line that we uttered in the Torah service? "Precious teaching do I give you, never forsake my Torah." Beautiful, beautiful section there. Joshua. Oh, looks like I'm missing a verse. Someone can open up to Joshua chapter 1, verse 8. Sorry, I forgot a slide in there. I wanted to read that verse before we continue on. Whoever has it first, feel free to read it.
"Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful."
Thank you, Brendan. Somewhere along the line in history, and this is something that we'll discuss in later class, like I said, a schism took place, and these words, the words of King Solomon, the words of Joshua, and the words of King David in the Psalms have fallen by the wayside, and all of a sudden what is considered the beautiful teachings of God has been considered some type of a law. Okay? And it's become kind of a sinister phrase, something that we should strive to avoid. But when you look into the scriptures, you find that that is not the case at all. In fact, one of the greatest injustices done in the history of humanity, in fact in the body of Messiah, is the perversion, this concept that Torah, that God's wonderful teachings, have somehow become this antiquated law. Okay? All of us, I think, to a certain extent, are familiar with that, and we're not going to get into those details today. But Yeshua himself, when asked in Mark 12:29 by one of the scribal sages of the time, one could wrap up the Torah and the history and the traditions of the Jewish people into one concept, one affirmation. It would fall directly in line with these words. Yeshua is asked, what is the greatest commandment of all? And he says this, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Now, how often do you hear messages and sermons taught about these words which Yeshua responded with to the scribe? It's not very often, is it? He says, Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. But of course, Yeshua also said in Matthew 5:17 that he didn't come to do away with the Torah. He came to perfectly interpret it, to fulfill it, to fill it full. Very interesting words here. It's a profound response. And it's been lost in time. It really has. Considering the fact that Yeshua was an observant Jew who came not to destroy, but to fulfill, it makes perfect sense that he would emphasize this text above all texts, because it not only highlights Adonai, the God of Israel, as the only God, but promotes the very foundation of Torah, which is obedience. So for a little review, let's see how obedience plays a role in the Shema. And I think you guys may be familiar, but bear with me, because this is foundations, of course. Shema literally means to hear, coming from the root shama. Hear with the intent to obey. Okay? What we'll come to see in our study of the ancient scriptures is sense-based. Big difference between a Hebraic biblical sense-based action prompting understanding and a more Greek, Western, philosophical, intellectual, and cerebral understanding. The Shema, hear with your ears. You have tasted that he is good. We'll talk about that in a later class when we talk about Hebraic versus Greek. Hebraic has everything to do with the things that God has created us with. And with those things, we revere him, we understand him, we get to know him, and we worship him through those. One of those is the ears. Hear with the intent to do. Okay? The Shema. Hear, O Israel, Adonai is our God, Adonai is one. Today, the Shema, and in fact it has for many centuries, pray twice daily, when you rise up and when you lie down, according to the continuation of the Shema in the book of Deuteronomy. And it's recited traditionally by observant Jews upon impending death. Okay? If you have the ability as a religious Jew and you see your death forthcoming, you utter the Shema. I remember many years ago during the Second Intifada, I believe it was in 2000, there was a religious Jew who was cornered. If you remember when Ariel Sharon walked up on the Temple Mount and all ruckus, pandemonium ensued. There was a religious Jew that very first day who was attacked in East Jerusalem by Muslim Arabs. And he was spared because a couple of Israeli policemen came to his rescue. And the picture of him, he was bloody, completely bloody. And he said that I saw my death was coming as he was being beaten by several men. And he said, all I could say was the Shema. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. The very impetus towards our obedience, towards action.